After nearly a decade in development, STALKER 2, Heart of Chernobyl, is here, and in the hands of everyday people. Between the prolific mod scene for the previous game and the hype building for literal years at this point, STALKER 2 has gargantuan shoes to fill and expectations to meet. We're looking at how the game lives up to those expectations within the context of the Day 1 patch, and whether it's worth buying right now, or waiting for some of the bugs to get squashed and a discount to come around. For context, I've spent about 23 hours in the game since release, and despite some very real frustrations getting the game to run consistently well without crashing, it's one of very few titles in recent memory that I think about playing when I'm not playing it. As always, the TLDR is up front, with more detailed information afterwards. Footage shown is from the first 2 zones, because spoilers here would be heresy. STALKER 2 is a unique thing. Capturing it in a soundbite really only scratches the surface, but here goes. Imagine if Fallout, Hunt Showdown, and Metro all had a kid together, and that kid then got isekai'd into a post-Chernobyl explosion where reality just nopes out. Salt in stellar freedom of choice, emergent gameplay, and survival aspects that make sense in-universe instead of just keeping bars topped off, and you come pretty close. Oh, and mutants. Lots of mutants. Weirdly, less threatening than the packs of wild boar, which continue to bully me throughout my playthrough, but RNG is RNG. Yes, I can already hear the Stalker stands whipping out the angry typing about that broad stroke generalization. Chill. We're building bridges to spread the gospel of the zone, not fences. Let's address the elephant in the room right away. The game does not run well without DLSS or FSR and/or frame generation, and you may likely spend a good amount of time troubleshooting things to fit your machine. It's UE5, so some degree of stutter is just gonna happen due to how the engine approaches asset and shader management. Go for the Steam version, not the Game Pass one. Maybe eventually we'll change their certification process so it can keep up with the other platforms, but I'm not holding my breath there. There are Bethesda-style bugs and physics interactions at times. These were few and far between in the time I've spent with the game, and none have been game-breaking to the point I had to reload a save. There is some texture pop-in, sometimes the lighting has a tantrum. Again, not the best for immersion, not game-breaking. Audio is great. Frankly, I'm not sure what the other reviews I see railing about this are on about. There's one consistent bug involving corpses continuing to make jostling around sounds, but the directional audio is great, soundscaping is immersive, weapons sound good, bloodsuckers are sphincter clenching. 9 out of 10. Combat is chunky and meaningful without being slow. It forces you to contemplate whether it's actually worth engaging in fights from a risk-reward standpoint, without overstepping its bounds and hamstringing your experience and enjoyment of the game. If you're willing to look past these shortcomings, what the game does marvelously well is atmospheric time dilation. The culmination of the soundscape, visuals, storytelling, gameplay, it does something wacky with your experience of the time dimension, such that you'll plan to sit down to play for an hour and suddenly it's midnight. So there's the TLDR version to draw your own conclusions from. If that's all you're after, thanks for listening so far. And if it was helpful, do me a solid and hit the like button before you go, so more people can get useful info without listening to several minutes of a YouTuber padding for time, so even more ads can get shoehorned into the video. If you want more in-depth perspectives on aspects of the game, there's chapter markers down below for each section. Graphics, performance, and technical aspects. I feel like I've been saying this quite frequently of late. Good news, it's Unreal Engine 5, so it's pretty. Bad news, it's Unreal Engine 5, so it's finicky. Baking ray tracing in as a software solution also seems nifty, but adds another layer of performance demands and potential for things to get weird. Honestly, this is where the title struggles the most, in my opinion. For perspective, my PC specs are on screen now. Your performance may vary based on your individual setups. You can make your own assumptions there. I've not played on console, so I can't speak to any specifics there, though I have heard that there's some issues due to a lack of dead zone on controllers and some other console-specific bugs going on. To play and capture smooth gameplay without crashes on my machine, here's everything I wound up doing. clean reinstall of the newest drivers, which, okay, sure, no big deal. You should be doing this anyway. Mandatory use of process lasso. Dropping all the in-game settings to high, minus motion blur, which immediately gets turned off in every game I play. Putting my video card back to its default clock and power curves, since I normally run a modest undervolt and overclock to reduce power consumption and retain most of the performance. And finally, capping the in-game frame rate to 60. And this one hurt, since I will almost always take more frames over more pretty, and I kind of got neither in this case. Since you're likely not recording and or streaming, some of these could get turned up a bit without substantial performance hits. Just know that you're not going to be getting FPS in the multiple hundreds, no matter what you do, within reason. That said, once you do find a combination of settings that work well for your individual machine, the overworld FPS is solid, although there is a bit of stutter on load for assets and shader management as you approach more densely populated zones, but that's a fault of how UE5 manages those systems. Hopefully more optimization can be done here as the game gets patches or modders work their arcane magic. Know that both mouse smoothing and mouse acceleration are a thing in-game by default. Good news is that you can edit the ini file to disable both, and the code for that and the file location for the Steam version, assuming you're using defaults, are in the description or a pinned comment down below. Moving on to the gameplay experience. At its core, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 does emergent gameplay right. Despite some of the issues with A-Life at the time of this record, the world does feel bespoke, which is honestly a welcome contrast to the never-ending march of open world game, the open world game. Getting from place to place and exploring as your curiosity guides you is just as much of the total experience as main story beats. And thus far, my more memorable moments have been these chance encounters. I think one of the next emotes for the channel might have to be a wild boar face, just based on how consistently they've been bullying me on stream. Gunplay and looting is detailed, purposeful, and not fast. This isn't to suggest that it's clunky or bad, rather that there's a through line of intentionality at the core of everything. Bullets matter. Supplies matter. Durability and maintenance matter without becoming cumbersome. If your experience with the game mirrors mine, you'll start off loot goblining everything, get a grip of ammo in your first half-decent weapon, think you're ready to bring the zone to heal, and then promptly be humbled by things harder than you. And the interplay between mass and gravity inside your pack. Once you learn to play the game on its terms, you fully embrace that bring just enough of everything and plan to loot as you go mentality, everything else clicks. The coupon economy does feel a bit out of balance in terms of weapon and upgrade costs, though the devs have said recently that some rebalancing there is coming with the first major patch to the game post-release. But speaking more broadly, supplies aren't plentiful, but also not overly punishing. And honestly, outside of accidentally carrying 36 grenades without noticing weight limits early in my time with the game, I've not encountered useless or annoying items within the context of the wider world. The physics interactions among objects isn't perfect, and occasionally items will stack weirdly, float in the air, or enemies will yeet themselves oddly in a direction on death. Is it immersion breaking? Sure. Is it a deal breaker? Not for me. You may be more or less sensitive to these things than I am. Since all of my playtime has been after the day 1 patch, I've not encountered any bugs in this area which prevent progression. Maybe I've been lucky, but based on what little I've seen online, you could be forgiven for thinking it's an unplayable mess. And that certainly is not the case. Thinking about sound and audio design, I feel like one of a few things is happening here. One, I've not encountered the degree of bugs other reviewers have railed on about. 2, I've not noticed them. Or 3, they're actually not that significant and negativity gets more clicks. Maybe it's a combination of the 3. Who knows? To that end, the only really significant weirdness with sound I've experienced has to do with corpses of enemies continuing to cue environmental interaction sounds as the geometry settles, but that's easily ignored. The broader audio design is on point. The directional audio works well enough to track enemies walking around corners, behind walls, or on floors above you. Weapons sound authentic enough without explodinating your eardrums, and mutants are sufficiently horrifying that I actively avoid them when possible. And speaking as somebody who's played the home game, traipsing around the zone feels like walking in the deep Northwoods from an audio standpoint, and the occasional stick break or out-of-place sound will stop you in your tracks to look over in that direction. 10 out of 10. Thinking now about story and player agency and freedom, keeping with the trend from my recent reviews of story-driven titles, this section is intentionally light to prevent spoilers and really just hit the important bits. Know this, everything I have encountered so far provides minimal guardrails on what or how you're able to interact with the world. Quest giver actually turns out to be kind of a dick after finishing the job? Well, apply the one-step 12-gauge behavior modification plan, and you get both rewards, or at least the satisfaction of preventing further spread of their poor choices. There does seem to be a faction rep system of sorts in the game, although that information isn't presented in handy bars to monitor which groups like you or not. Some people will like this, some people will hate this. It's fine. Some sequences are more heavily scripted than others, but this is necessary for the broader narrative. And I've not yet finished the story, mostly because I tend towards completionism in games like this, but multiple endings depending on your actions are advertised. We'll see how this winds up playing as time goes on. In the beginning of my time with the game, oh boy, I was salty. The incessant crashes and poor performance were maddening. It took a sledgehammer to my streaming plans, and I very nearly hit refund. After a not insignificant amount of troubleshooting that certainly won't be to everyone's taste, I'm glad I didn't. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is solid, if imperfect, and in my opinion, it's a worthy successor to the name. Things only stand to get better from here, either through official patches or modders working their magic. At the time of this record, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is free on Game Pass for PC, provided you can make that version work, and $60 US on Steam. I'd say it's worth every penny. I'm glad to have made this review, but man, making it cut into time I could have been playing, which is what I'm going to go back to now. So, I've been Bald Squid, and I'll see you in the zone.